Welcome.
Welcome to the Everything podcast. In this episode, I'm reviewing the Big Finish podcast episode released on the 14th of July 2024, but we've got the usual cast list. So the Big Finish podcast in this specific episode stars is presented by Nicholas Briggs and Benji Clifford. It is also written by Nicholas Briggs, and as I previously mentioned, it was released on the 14th of July 2024. My opinion on this episode of the Big Finish podcast is as follows. I loved Nick's interview with Jodie and Mandip, and I liked the listeners' email segment, and I enjoyed the behind the scenes of Goth Opera. But without further ado, here's my review of the 14th of July 2024 edition of the Big Finish podcast. Benji introduces the episode. Nick and Benji gives a rundown of what to expect within this episode, which is including a look at the 13th Doctor adventures and a 15-minute drama tease of Goth Opera. Benji and Nick discuss Jodie Whittaker and Mandip Gill returning to their roles as the 13th Doctor and Yasmin Khan for the 13th Doctor adventures. So yes, it's very, as I said, I will be talking about it more in my July 2024 roundup, just so it's all there, but that basically covers it. You've got the 13th Doctor and Yaz adventures, and they will be starting to be released from July 2025. Nick reveals that Jodie offers to buy everyone a coffee on recording days. Nick mentions the time gap between Mandip and Jodie's last TV episode, Power of the Doctor, which was released in October 2022, and recording and releasing the first of the 13th Doctor adventures, which I think has already been recorded but will release, as I said, in July 2025. Nick recounts Jodie telling some cast members that her playing the 13th Doctor was the best time of her life. Nick introduces Jodie and Mandip. Mandip and Jodie discuss how their first recording day is going. Jodie mentions audio scripts not needing to be learnt. Jodie and Mandip discuss what surprised them regarding recording for Big Finish. Jodie asked Mandip a question regarding the 13th Doctor. Jodie reveals how she got back into the role of the 13th Doctor. Mandip exposes Jodie messing up one of her lines. Jodie and Mandip reveal that they talk multiple times a week. Mandip comments on sometimes Jodie not replying to her messages. Mandip also reveals that Jodie is really good at recording voice messages. Mandip blames Nick for missing a call from Jodie. Jodie and Mandip discuss what they believe the 13th Doctor adventures will feel like. Obviously, we'll find out in July 2025, or starting from July 2025. And then next up, the trailer for Torchwood, The Empire Man occurs. Benji and Nick mention Peter Nolan. Nick reveals the location of a previous Big Finish office. Benji mentions his old neighbours. Nick and Benji read multiple reviews of Torchwood, The Empire Man. Nick confesses that the sound designer for the second Doctor adventures, which when you're watching this episode, all three of the second Doctor adventures conspiracy of Raven is out on the channel. My reviews for all three stories. I did it as 3 different episodes, otherwise it would have been huge, and they're not the same story, because I will be doing that for Goth Opera, which as I said in yesterday's episode, is recorded on the day I'm releasing this, the 17th of July 2024, and will be the same for Death World, and Operation Werewolf will be similar to the second Doctor adventures. And if you don't want to scroll down, if you go to playlists, second Doctor adventures, they're all in there. Back to the episode now. Nick confesses that the sound designer for the second Doctor adventures unfortunately fell down the stairs. Benji mentions the flying squad. Benji points out Nick's pronunciation of bow. Next week's review segment will include reviews on Short Trips, the World Tree, which was a winner of the Short Trips competition that is now closed for this year, which was basically created to remember a Big Finish colleague, I think, yeah, that's right. Benji reminds us of what is still left to be discussed on this episode of the Big Finish podcast. Behind the scenes interviews from Goth Opera takes place next. David O'Mahony introduces himself. David talks about his love for the Goth Opera script. David mentions the vampires featured in Goth Opera. Janet Fielding introduces herself. Sarah Sutton also introduces herself. Several scenes from Goth Opera are incorporated into these behind the scenes. Sarah talks about how Goth Opera affects Nyssa. Sarah recalls an experience of signing a copy of Goth Opera. Janet and Sarah confess not reading the novel version of Goth Opera. David reveals that Goth Opera is centred around Nyssa. David mentions the other cast members featured in Goth Opera. Peter Davison introduces himself. Peter comments on the Doctor fighting vampires within Goth Opera. Peter also reveals that he doesn't drink tea. Benji reveals how to send emails to the podcast. Nick and Benji discuss Pravda. One of the emails featured in this episode relates to the Silence of Time Redux, which I've talked about in my July to December 2024, and we'll talk about more in the future, which will release in November 2024, which is a new version of the first ever Big Finish Doctor Who story, which was released all the way back in 1999. Nick mentions a non-Big Finish story he previously wrote. Another of these emails mentions the new music featured in the podcast. This email also mentions Big Finish's extensive back catalogue, the reason why I decided to go new and not go, I know I'm going to review every Big Finish because we'd be here probably till the end of time. The final email of this episode's listeners' email segment comments on several topics. Nick mentions the Riverside Studios as well as Leela and Romana, Gallifrey, the 13th Doctor Adventures and Torchwood. Benji and Nick each do an impression. Each Big Finish podcast episode also has a segment called the Random on Connectatron, which gives a 25% discount on a Big Finish release. This week that release is The Middle, featuring the 6th Doctor. Nick comments on the Big Finish website search feature. Nick mentions the Silurians. The trailer for The Middle is then added to this episode. Nick guesses the director of The Middle correctly. Benji reads out a review of The Middle. Benji explains how the 25% discount works. Next week's Big Finish podcast will cover the Lost Stories, Death World and Operation Werewolf, which obviously I'll be reviewing once they've been released. Following next week's podcast, the Big Finish podcast will take a 2-week break, returning on the 18th of August 2024. That maths doesn't quite work out, but it could be that it's 3 or they haven't done the dates quite right. We're not entirely sure. This episode of the Big Finish podcast finishes with a 15-minute tease of the novel adaptations Goth Opera, which obviously I'll be reviewing, and actually I've used that 15-minute drama tease so I could start my review of Goth Opera early, so I can get that to you sooner. Next time on the Everything podcast, I'll be reviewing the 2024 Euros. Told you it would be something you'd be expecting. See, so we've done The Traitors, we've done Top Gear, I did Eurovision earlier on in the year, and now I'm covering the Euros, and I'll be covering the Olympics and Paralympics when they start, because I think the Olympics have definitely started when this episode is being released, but when I'm recording this it's about a week away, so yeah. But back to this episode, let me know what you thought about the Big Finish episode released, the Big Finish podcast episode released on the 14th of July 2024 if you listened to it, and my review if you didn't. You can put your thoughts on both of those in the comments below, as well with anything else you want me to cover on the channel. So it could be a review suggestion for your favourite TV show or movie. So movie side, we've had Argyle, Back to the Future Part 2, Hitman, just to name a few. And TV side, we've had Fallout, House of the Dragon, both seasons, and The Boys season 4. So yes, book reviews, I'm willing to do them, not had any yet, and comic reviews. I've been asked to do a 90s Marvel review, and I've chosen to review the Avengers Forever comic series because it's only 12 issues, it's not going to take forever. As well with any news about your favourite TV show or movie, and as I continue to mention, I'll be covering both San Diego Comic Con and D23 2024. But that's it for this episode of the podcast. And remember, you can also like, comment and subscribe. Done it the wrong way around. Comment all of those in the comments below as well. And you can also like, comment and subscribe. And that's it for this episode of the Everything podcast. Goodbye.